folks. I'm just going to read the next section of City of Ember. So, for those of you who don't remember, Lena and Dune just got their assignments, and Dune asked Lena to switch. So she is now a messenger. So she is heading home to go tell her family that she is a messenger. Now, as Lena sped towards home, she felt immensely grateful to Dune and hoped he'd come to no harm in the pipeworks. Maybe they'd become friends again. She'd like to ask him about the pipeworks. She was curious about it. When she got to Greystone Street, she passed Clary Lane, who was probably on her way to the greenhouses. Clary waved to her and called out, "What job?" And Lena called back, "Messenger," and ran on. Lena lived in Quilliam Square, over the yarn shop run by her grandmother. When she got to the shop, she burst in the door and cried, "Granny, I'm a messenger!" Granny's shop had once been a tidy place, where each ball of yarn and spool of thread had its spot in the cubby holes that lined the walls. All the yarn and thread came from old clothes that had gotten too shabby to be worn. Granny's unraveled sweaters and picked apart dresses and jackets and pants. She wound the yarn into balls and the thread onto spools, and people bought them to use in making new clothes. These days, the shop was a mess. Long loops and strands of yarn dangled out of the cubby holes, and the browns and grays and purples were mixed in with the olive greens and dark blues. Granny's customers often had to spend a half an hour unsnarling the rust red yarn from the mud brown, or trying to fish out the end of a thread from a tangled wad. Granny wasn't much help. Most days she just dozed behind the counter in her rocking chair. That's where she was when Lena burst in with her news. Lena saw that Granny had forgotten to knot up her hair that morning. It was standing out from her head in a wild white frizz. Granny stood up, looking puzzled. "You aren't a messenger, dear. You're a schoolgirl," she said. "But, Granny, today was assignment day. I got my job, and I'm a messenger." Granny's eyes lit up, and she slapped her hand down on the counter. "I remember," she cried. "Messenger. That's a grand job. You'll be good at it." Lena's little sister toddled out from behind the counter on unsteady legs. She had a round face and round brown eyes. At the top of her head was a sprig of brown hair tied up with a scrap of red yarn. She grabbed onto Lena's knees. "Weena, Weena," she said. Lena bent over and took the child's hands. "Poppy, your big sister got a good job. Are you happy, Poppy? Are you proud of me?" Poppy said something that sounded like "hoppy, hoppy, hoppy." Lena laughed, hoisted her up, and danced with her around the little shop. Lena loved her little sister so much it was like an ache under her ribs. The baby and Granny were all the family she had now. 2 years ago, when the coughing sickness was raging through the city again, her father had died. Some months later, her mother, giving birth to Poppy, had died too. Lena missed her parents with an ache that was as strong as what she felt for Poppy, only it was a hollow feeling instead of a full one. "When do you start?" asked Granny. "Tomorrow," said Lena. "I report to the messenger station at 8 o'clock." "You'll be a famous messenger," said Granny. "Fast and famous." Taking Poppy with her, Lena went out of the shop and climbed the stairs to their apartment. It was a small apartment, only 4 rooms, but there was enough stuff in it to fill 20. There were things that had belonged to Lena's parents, her grandparents, and even their grandparents. Old, broken, cracked, threadbare things that had been patched and repaired dozens or even hundreds of times. People in Ember rarely threw anything away. They made the best possible use of what they had. In Lena's apartment, layers of worn rugs and carpets covered the floor, making it soft and uneven underfoot. Against one wall squatted a sagging couch with round wooden balls for legs, and on the couch were blankets and pillows, so many that you had to toss them on the floor before you could sit down. Against the opposite wall stood 2 wobbly tables that held a clutter of plates and bowls, cups and bottles, unmatching forks and spoons, little piles of scrap paper, bits of string wound up into untidy wads, and a few stubby pencils. There were 4 lamps, 2 tall ones that stood on the floor and 2 short ones that stood on tables. And in uneven lines up near the ceiling were hooks that held coats and shawls and nightgowns and sweaters, shelves that held pots and pans, jars with unreadable labels, and boxes and buttons and pins and tacks. So that's a whole big paragraph there that kind of explains that Lita's apartment was not very tidy. So you're thinking when you walk in and it's just full of things. Where there were no shelves, the walls had been decorated with things of beauty. Listen to these things of beauty. A label from a can of peaches. A few dried yellow squash flowers. A strip of faded but still pretty purple cloth. There were drawings, too. Lena had done drawings out of her imagination. They showed a city that looked somewhat like Ember, except that its buildings were lighter and taller and had more windows. One of the drawings had fallen to the floor. Lena had, sorry, I just got a little distracted thinking if there's no sunlight, there's not really a need for windows. Lena retrieved it and pinned it back up. She stood for a minute and looked at the pictures. Over and over she'd drawn the same city. Sometimes she drew it as seen from afar. Sometimes she chose one of its buildings and drew it in detail. She put in stairways and street lamps and carts. Sometimes she tried to draw the people who lived in the city, though she wasn't good at drawing people. Their heads always came out too small and their hands looked like spiders. One picture showed a scene in which people of the city greeted her when she arrived, the first person they'd ever seen to come from elsewhere. They argued with each other about who should be the first to invite her home. Lena could see the city so clearly in her mind she almost believed it was real. She knew it couldn't be, though. The book of the City of Ember, which all children studied in school, taught otherwise. The City of Ember was made for us long ago by the builders, the book said. It is the only light in a dark world. Beyond Ember, the darkness goes on forever in all directions. Lena had been to the outer border of Ember. She had stood at the edge of the trash heaps and gazed into the darkness beyond the city, the unknown regions. No one had ever gone far into the unknown regions, or at least no one had gone far and returned, and no one had ever arrived in Ember from the unknown regions either. As far as anyone knew, the darkness did go on forever. Still, Lena wanted the other cities to exist. In her imagination, it was so beautiful and seemed so real. Sometimes she longed to go there and take everyone in Ember with her. But she wasn't thinking about the other city now. Today she was happy to be right where she was. She set Poppy on the couch. "Wait there," she said. She went into the kitchen, where there was an electric stove and a refrigerator that no longer worked and was used to store glasses and dishes so Poppy wouldn't get at them. Above the refrigerator were shelves holding more pots and jars, more spoons and knives, a wind-up clock that Granny always forgot to wind, and a long row of cans. Lena tried to keep the cans in alphabetical order so she could find what she wanted quickly, but Granny always messed them up. Now she saw there were beans at the end of the row and tomatoes at the beginning. She picked out a can labeled "Baby Drink" and a jar of boiled carrots, opened them, poured the liquid into a cup and the carrots into a little dish, and took these back to the baby on the couch. Poppy dribbled baby drink down her chin. She ate some of her carrots and poked others between the couch cushions. For the moment, Lena felt almost perfectly happy. There was no need to think about the fate of the city right now. Tomorrow she'd be a messenger. She wiped the orange goop off Poppy's chin. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything will be all right." Now there's a little three dots here that shows that there's been some passage of time. The messenger's headquarters was on Clothing Street, not far from the back of the gathering hall. When Lena arrived in the next morning, she was greeted by Messenger Captain Alice Fleary, a bony woman with pale eyes and hair the color of dust. "Our new girl," said Captain Fleary to the other messengers, a cluster of 9 people who smiled and nodded at Lena. "I have your jacket right here," said the captain. She handed Lena a red jacket like the one all messengers wore. It was only a little too big. From the clock tower of the gathering hall came a deep, reverberating bong. "8 o'clock!" cried Captain Fleary. She waved a long arm. "Take your stations!" As the clock sounded 7 more times, the messengers scattered in all directions. The captain turned to Lena. "Your station," she said, "is Garn Square." Lena nodded and started off, but the captain caught her by the collar. "I haven't told you the rules," she said. She held up a knobby finger. 1. When a customer gives you a message, repeat it back to make sure you have it right. 2. Always wear your red jacket so people can identify you. 3. Go as fast as possible. Your customers pay 20 cents for every message, no matter how far you have to take it. Lena nodded. "I always go fast," she said. 4. The captain went on. Deliver a message only to the person it's meant for, no one else. Lena nodded again. She bounced a little on her toes, eager to get going. Captain Fleary smiled. "Go," she said, and Lena went off. She felt strong and speedy and sure-footed. She glanced at her reflection as she ran past the windows of a furniture repair shop. She liked the look of her long, dark hair flying out behind her, her long legs in their black socks, and her flapping red jacket. Her face, which had never seemed especially remarkable, looked almost beautiful because she looked so happy. As soon as she came into Garn Square, a voice cried, "Messenger!" Her first customer. It was old Natty Prine, calling to her from the bench where he always sat. "This goes to Ravinston Parsons, 18 Silverton Square," he said. Bend down. She bent down so that her ear was close to his whiskery mouth. The old man said in a slow, hoarse voice, My stove is broke. Don't come for dinner. Repeat. Lena repeated the message. Good, said Natty Prine. He gave Lena 20 cents, and she ran across the city to Silverton Square. There she found Ravenette Parsons, also sitting on a bench. She recited the message to him. Old turnip head, he growled. Lazy old flea face. He just doesn't feel like cooking. No reply. Lena ran back to Garn Square, passing a couple of believers on the way. They were standing in a circle, holding hands, singing one of their cheerful songs. Now, believers in this, when I read it here, has a capital B, which means it's a name. So it's going to be more like a name of a group. It seemed to Lena that there were more believers than ever these days. What they believed in, she didn't know, but it must make them happy. They were always smiling. Her next customer turned out to be Mrs. Polster, the teacher of the fourth-year class. In Mrs. Polster's class, they memorized passages from the book of City of Ember every week. Mrs. Polster had charts on the walls for everything, with everyone's name listed. If you did something right, she made a green dot by your name. If you did something wrong, she made a red dot. What you need to learn, children, she always said in her resonant, precise voice, is the difference between right and wrong in every area of life. And once you learn the difference, here she would stop and point to the class, and the class would finish the sentence. You must always choose the right. In every situation, Mrs. Polster knew what the right choice was. Now here was Mrs. Polster again, looming over Lena and pronouncing her message. To Anisette Lafronde, 39 Hum Street, as follows, she said. My confidence in you has been seriously diminished since I heard about the disreputable activities in which you engaged on Thursday last. Please repeat. It took Lena 3 times to get this one right. Uh-oh, a red dot for me, she said, smiling. Mrs. Polster did not seem to find this amusing. Lena had 19 customers that first morning. Some of them had ordinary messages. I can't come on Tuesday. Or, buy a pound of potatoes on your way home. Or, please come and fix my front door. Others had messages that made no sense to her at all, like Mrs. Polster's. But it didn't matter. The wonderful part about being a messenger was not the messages, but the places she got to go. She could go into the houses of people she didn't know, and hidden alleyways and little rooms in the backs of stores. In just a few hours, she discovered all kinds of strange and interesting things. For instance, Mrs. Sample, the mender, had to sleep on her couch because her entire bedroom, almost up to the ceiling, was crammed with clothes to be mended. Dr. Ferlinia Tower had a skeleton of a person hanging against her living room wall, its bones all held in place with black strings. I study it, she said when she saw Lena staring. I have to know how people are put together. At a house on Calloo Street, Lena delivered a message to a worried-looking man whose living room was completely dark. I'm saving on light bulbs, the man said. Can you imagine sitting at home in the dark all day long? And when Lena took a message to the Can Cafe, she learned that on certain days the back room was used as a meeting place for people who liked to converse about great subjects. Do you think an invisible being is watching over us all the time? She heard someone else ask. Perhaps, answered someone. There was a long silence. And then again, perhaps not. All of it was interesting. She loved finding things out, and she loved running. And by the end of the day, she wasn't even tired. Running made her feel strong and big-hearted. It made her love the places she ran through and the people whose messages she delivered. She wished she could bring all of them good news they so desperately wanted to hear. All right, we're going to pause there.